everybody, it's Emily at Arg Schooling, and today I'm going to be doing a video telling you all about my favorite historical television series and movies. So I have been brainstorming this video for what feels like weeks, and I think I've narrowed it down. I'm going to stick to 5 and 5. We're going to talk about 5 of my favorite shows and 5 of my favorite movies. I've watched a lot of things, and I'm struggling to keep this at like a reasonable level. So 5 and 5. We're going to start with shows, and these are in no particular order, like chronologically or anything else. So the first show I want to talk about is Vikings. The television show Vikings aired from, I think, 2013, and it just ended. So there were 6 seasons all told, and this was one of those shows that I just found it so beautiful to look at and so stunning, and the cast has all been really amazing. Is it perfect? No. But I loved watching it. And it's just, there's not a lot on that time period. There is now, I feel like. But at the time, like, usually historical television shows focus on like Victorian era or, beautiful costumes. Vikings wasn't as pretty necessarily as like the gowns and the hair, and although the hair is pretty cool on the Vikings, I have to say. So it's written by Michael Hurst, who has done other shows, which we'll talk about later, that I really enjoyed. So like, I trust him. My one issue is that the women were not allowed to age. I mean, honestly, nobody aged up a lot on this show. But like, at one point, Lagertha is like 80 years old and she still looks like she's in her 30s, but her hair's white. Like, that's the only aging she was allowed. White hair. Everything else about her was still like youthful. But aside from that, I just thought the show was great. I loved all of it. The next series I want to talk about is The Last Kingdom. Now, one of the things that I loved about watching Vikings is that the last season overlaps with the beginning of The Last Kingdom. So The Last Kingdom is a British television series that is aired exclusively on Netflix, I believe. And it's based on the Saxon Tales, I think, series by Bernard Cornwell. And I've read a few of his books, and I think that they're really well done. And so I was excited to see that this, one of his long-running series, would become a TV show. And I love it. It's so good. It has the same feel as the Vikings does, but a different time period and a different place, where Vikings focuses on Norway for the most part, but they're venturing out into other places. The Last Kingdom is exclusively in England, and you get to watch England start to form itself into a country from these different little kingdoms. And the main character is Uhtred, who was born a Saxon but is kidnapped and raised by the Danes. So his birth makes him a Saxon, but his upbringing makes him one of the Danes or Vikings. And so he's kind of torn between these two. He doesn't really belong in either one. And you see that kind of play out in his life and the choices that he makes. And he doesn't quite fit, but he tries to be a Saxon, but he's not quite. It's great. The acting is so good. And just every single person in the cast is phenomenal. I adore all of them, and I love the show so much. It's so good. I'm dying for another season. Like, I need it so bad. Like, I'm about to rewatch the whole thing just because I need more. The next show I want to talk about, I'm going to start with a caveat. This is not a show for everyone. This show is dark and gritty and so violent. Super violent, gory, lots of nudity. So you don't necessarily need to watch it. Just know that I loved it. And that is Spartacus. I was obsessed with Spartacus when it first aired. I just think everything about it is just so gorgeous to look at, but also like so dark. And the storylines, oh my gosh, the writing, the dialogue is just so good. It's one of those shows where it's very twisty-turny, you don't quite know who to trust. The writing is just so great. and the dialogue. I love the way they speak on the show because it's meant to sound kind of like Latin would sound directly translated. So they talk in this really interesting way. So Spartacus aired for I think 3 seasons, and it ran from like 2010 to 2013. The first season stars Andy Whitfield as Spartacus, and he was amazing. Like, he made the show, honestly. All of the cast is excellent, but Andy was just so great at embodying the character of Spartacus. And when he died, I wasn't sure what they were going to do. They did a prequel season when Andy was sick. He had cancer, and they were hoping that he would come back and then they would go to the next season. But sadly, he did not. They recast the character of Spartacus, and Liam McIntyre took on the role. And I'm not here to bash him. That's not even my problem. But the show does kind of... it's not the same. And that's not any fault of Liam. He was great. He just wasn't Andy. It was just sad, the whole situation. But I still loved the show. If you don't know, Spartacus is a Thracian soldier who was taken prisoner during a war with Rome and made a slave. And he was bought to fight as a gladiator and renamed Spartacus. Like, you never know. You never find out what his real name is. He's on this mission of vengeance because when he was captured, his wife was taken from him, and all he wants is to be able to earn his freedom so he can buy her back because she's been enslaved as well. And I'm not going to go into spoiler territory, but it is historical, so it's not like it's not something you could look up. But it's just so, like, great. But again, like I said, not for everyone. Lots of naked people, equal opportunity nudity. But the show is so good. And I'm due for a rewatch because I just love it. And it's been a while. Next show I want to talk about is one of my very favorite things, and I've rewatched it so many times. It never gets old, and that is The Tudors. Are you surprised? I didn't think so. You all know I love The Tudors, like not just the series, but like in general, anything Tudor related, I'm down for that. I'm interested. I've been obsessed with that for decades, it feels like. And this show aired from 2007 to 2010, and it's also by Michael Hurst. Stars Jonathan Rhys-Meyers as Henry VIII. Is he my first choice for casting as far as Henry VIII? No. Nothing against Jonathan Rhys-Meyers. He's very handsome, and he's very talented. He's really good at the intensity level of what you need to portray Henry VIII. I'll give you that. But visually, he is about as far from Henry VIII as you can get. He's tiny, and he's thin, and just, it's not... like, when they try to age him up and make him look overweight, it's just not... it doesn't work. Like, at no point in that series do I believe that he is old and smelly and, like, fat. Historically accurate? No, not really. It's a little bit, like, you get the gist of it. You know who each of the wives are and what happened to them. Casting-wise, there's a lot to be desired here, but Natalie Dormer's in it, and I just love her, so she's the highlight, really, for me. But, you know, I love any kind of portrayal I can get of the Tudors, and, like, that whole, just the pageantry and the costumes and the political intrigue. I love it. It's all so great. James Frain plays Thomas Cromwell, and he's just excellent. Michael Hurst is great. He writes some of the best, like, historical television. So good. The last TV series I want to talk about, and this was hard. I have several on my list that I really wanted to talk about too, but, like, I wanted to keep it at 5. So my 5th show, the last one I'm going to talk about, is The Marvelous Mrs Maisel. The Marvelous Mrs Maisel is a comedy television drama sort of story on Amazon Prime, and it's set in the 1950s. There are currently 3 seasons out, and a 4th season is supposed to be coming. It's been on since 2017, so it's fairly new. I'm waiting on the 4th season now. It stars Rachel Brosnahan as Midge Maisel, who it's just so fantastic. So, okay, this show is witty and funny. It's about a woman kind of discovering that she has this talent at stand-up comedy, that her husband was trying to be a stand-up comic and it just wasn't quite working for him. And then she, on a whim one night, like in a drunken stupor, goes on stage and performs and is amazing, and like everything changes. And I just love the series so much. It's very Jewish, which I was obsessed with that. Just like seeing that much Jewishness portrayed accurately on television was exciting to see, because it's just not something you see a lot of. For me, a lot of it was a bit nostalgic. Now, granted, I did not grow up in that time period, so that part not so much, but just the way they talk and like their mannerisms and stuff, like, that's my grandparents. And like, I heard a lot of that stuff growing up, and so I don't know, it's great to be able to see that. I love the character of Midge. I love her relationship with her husband, ex-husband, and like the will they won't they ness of it. I love seeing her develop her talent. I love Susie Meyerson. She's my favorite character on the show. I love like their dynamic together. Ugh. I need to rewatch it. I've been telling Sarah that I'm going to watch it with her since she hasn't seen it yet, because I just need another excuse to watch it. Been trying to get my mom to watch it because I feel like it's a show she would love. And like, I know she hasn't seen that kind of Jewishness portrayed on television before either, and I think she would love that. It's so good. I feel like I just rambled for 20 minutes about how great The Marvelous Mrs Maisel is. Like, seriously, go watch it. The dialogue, her stand-up, it's just so good. Now let's talk about my favorite historical movies. I've already talked about some in my tag video, so I'm trying not to repeat myself. Let's start off with a 2-for-1, because I could not decide which one to talk about. We're going to talk about both of them. And that is two different Diary of Anne Frank adaptations. So the first one I want to talk about is called Anne Frank, The Whole Story, and it came out in 2001. And this one I have to give mention to, because it does something that no other version of Anne Frank I've ever seen has done, which is to carry beyond the secret annex and show us what happened to her in the camps. And so you get to see their capture, them being taken to the various camps, and like they're being spread out, and what happened to Margot and Anne. And then you see Otto afterwards, like finding out what happened to his family. And so for that, I love it, because I think it's important to tell the whole story. Usually it just ends at the very end with like, and they were captured, and that's it. I don't know. I always felt like they leave you hanging. So I love that we get to see the whole scope of the story. The acting is great. Otto Frank is played by Ben Kingsley, who I think does a really great job. The girl that plays Anne, Hannah Taylor-Gordon, does a pretty good job. I think overall the casting and everything really works well for this movie, and you get the whole story. The other Anne Frank I must tell you about is one I only recently discovered, and it's kind of become my favorite. And the other one I want to talk about is The Diary of Anne Frank. That came out in 2009, and this was a made-for-TV movie. And I have to tell you about this one, because the actress that plays Anne in this was so good. And it portrayed Anne in a way that I don't think I've ever seen before, which I just thought was perfection. And it's Ellie Kendrick is the actress that plays Anne. And the reason I thought this was so spectacular was that she portrayed Anne the way I think Anne probably really was, in that she was moody, she had a lot of teen angst, as anyone would, being trapped in an attic for years. Like, she was very angsty, she was very, like, saucy, a little bit sassy. She just had this whole dynamic personality that I think often when we see Anne portrayed in television and movies and things is just very kind of demure. And they focus a lot on her innocence and that sort of thing, as opposed to the fact that, like, she was more than that. And so I really liked Ellie's portrayal of her. This also had a really great cast. Felicity Jones plays Margot. Ian Glenn plays Otto Frank. So I just thought this particular cast was really, really good. The actress that played Anne was just spectacular, and I just love it. The next movie I want to talk about is one I haven't actually watched in a really long time, but it's one that I think about frequently. It's called Flowers of War, and it came out in 2011, and it stars Christian Bale, and this story is about the rape of Nanking, and it's about this man who, I guess I don't know if he's a priest or a pastor or something to do with church. And he tries to protect a group of Chinese girls who are students at this school from being taken by the Japanese as comfort women. And the whole thing is just, it's beautiful and it's sad. And it does a very good job of showing the gritty reality of what it was like to live in Nanking in that time period. And I just thought it was done in such a beautiful way. It is based on a book, and I read the book too, and this is one of those rare instances where I liked the movie better than the book, but they were both very good. But the visuals of the movie, I think, just made it special for me. The next is also a twofer, because why not? And that is the To Elizabeth movie, Emily from the Future. So I'm editing the video when I realized that my camera cut off and I lost a bunch of footage. I had the end of the video. I don't know what happened. I'm baffled. So I thought I'd come in here looking like this. I know, I'm sorry. It's chaotic, but this is literally the only way I'm going to get this video done. So bear with me. So Elizabeth I and Elizabeth the Golden Age are some of my favorite movies. Elizabeth I was made in 1998. And stars Cate Blanchett as a very young Queen Elizabeth, on the cusp of becoming the queen, and then the first, I think, couple of years of her reign, up until she decides that she's just not going to get married. And so I love this movie because I love the way the costumes and everything just come together to make it feel like you're there in the middle of it happening. I love Cate Blanchett. She's a fantastic actress. She just really embodies Elizabeth in this role, not just in her vulnerability and all of that, but also the regalness of her. I just love it. And then Elizabeth, the Golden Age was made in 2007 and also stars Cate Blanchett playing a much older Elizabeth. And it's sort of like the second half of her reign, and it has to do with the Spanish Armada and stuff. So it's the same story, just, down the road a little ways. And again, the costumes, just everything about it is gorgeous, and I love it. Then the next movie I want to talk about is Jojo Rabbit, which is one of my new favorite movies of all time. It's just so great. So I remember hearing about the early rumblings of this movie and being like, wait a minute, excuse me, you're gonna do what? Because it doesn't, on paper, it doesn't sound like it should work. Taika Waititi is brave and maybe a genius. Yes, a genius. And I just think he's amazing, and what he did here is just so great. So it's a story about a boy who lives in Nazi Germany, and his imaginary friend is Hitler, played by Taika Waititi. So, a comedic Hitler story sounds terrible, but I promise it's amazing. This is a story about a boy kind of finding out that everything he thought he knew was wrong, and that the adults he thought he could trust were failing him, and that his mother was more than she would let on to be. I just think the story isn't necessarily anything new, but the way Taika Waititi pulls it together, it's just, it's so good. It's so good. And that was made in 2019, by the way. I forgot to say that. I'm so unorganized. I'm sorry. Okay, and the last movie I want to talk about is called Dangerous Beauty. And it was made again in 1998. The late 90s were the heyday, I think, of historical dramas. It's just so many good costume dramas. Shakespeare in Love is another one. Oh, so many great movies. Braveheart. The 90s was a time. Dangerous Beauty stars Catherine McCormick and Rufus Sewell, and it's about a woman who lives in Renaissance Venice, and she is like not a peasant, but just not wealthy. And she's in love with this man who is of the upper class, and they know they can't marry. She just thinks it's extremely unfair that the man she loves and that loves her, they can't be together. And when he becomes engaged to another woman, she becomes a courtesan, which gives her the ability to move in the upper crust of society, even though she still remains on the outskirts because she's not one of them, even though that she can move in their circles. And it's just, there's a whole thing about witchcraft and like the power of a woman in a situation like this. Like, she had so much power over all these men, and they just sort of didn't realize it because they just see her as a sex object. And this movie was so good. Like, if you haven't seen it, you should see it. It's so good. Like, I love Rufus. This was the movie for me that I think like solidified that he was gonna be this megastar, and that I would like watch anything he was in, and so far that's held true. Like, he can do no wrong. And I'm so sorry that I had to film this whole section on my phone in this state. It's not ideal, but at least we have the whole video now. So, carry on. So I'd love for you guys to leave me some recommendations down below. What are your favorite historical movies and television shows? I would love to be able to check out whatever you recommend because I'm always looking for new things to watch. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you guys next time. Happy reading. Bye!